So it's interesting because I've shared my story before, and um, today I want to talk about um, sexual abuse, or at least a different kind of sexual abuse, and codependency and sovereignty, like personal sovereignty, like being having all of your personal power, and it's it's super challenging because it's extremely vulnerable. So my plan is to be um, kind of what feels like ridiculously vulnerable in sharing some of my story. And the reason I want to do that is because I know that there's great power in not only sharing one story, but for others hearing someone else's story. And I'm hoping that um, whatever comes of what I share here will be beneficial and nourishing and healing to those who see and hear this. So, but obviously, with vulnerability comes the fears, like the internal accusations that I'm trying to draw attention to myself, or um, trying to get sympathy or pity or something like that. Um, and based on everything that I experienced in my childhood and growing up and life so far, I know that my tendency is to go into freeze mode. So I can kind of like my mind will go blank and my body will freeze up. My breath just gets really shallow and really slow. Um, so processing through all of that and practicing um, self-compassion and kind of doing some life coaching toward myself as I go along. And that's all stuff I've been practicing for years now. So I know that this will play out well. And I'm just trusting that what I remember to share as I go through my notes will be exactly what needs to be shared. So it was almost September this year. So another 6 months will be 10 years from when I first wrote the article, A Different Kind of Sexual Abuse. And that was that was like the first time I felt like I had any way of articulating well enough to give a glimpse into some of my experience, especially around sexuality and the abuse that I experienced. So the reason I called it a different kind of sexual abuse was because it definitely affected my sexuality, but it wasn't what you typically think of when you think of sexual abuse. Um, and so I'll go over that a little bit um, as we go along. But so that was kind of the first time I shared something super vulnerable. And I posted it initially as a note on Facebook. And then there was a couple years later when I felt like I needed to take it down. And then a while after that, I decided to unhide it. And so it looked like I posted it again. So I had a fresh pile of viewings. And then a few years later, I posted on my blog. Um, so, but even with that being out there, even some of my close friends that have been with me through a lot of the journey and have read that article, um, will kind of think that it's strange that I talk about codependency or um, uh, difficulty or challenge in relationship because I am a man. And so because I'm a white male, I should have all the privilege, which I can definitely see where that is in my life. And so I don't deny that. But there are unique ways that I have experienced trauma that I want to share again, and possibly with more understanding, being that it's been 10 years since I initially wrote that first article. And hopefully, like, this is not a competition. This is not a way to draw attention away from others who are suffering or who need to be heard. But hopefully, sharing my story will give some of you the strength to share your story. And what we need in order to heal is witness, to understand our own journey and to begin our own healing process. Because I believe that the world is healed as we heal ourselves and as we set the example of that empowerment to heal ourselves. So kind of the overall big picture that is important to understand as far as where my trauma was experienced comes from understanding that I was basically a hostage in my parents' home, my dad's home, for the first 22 years of my life. He was angry, controlling, had all those issues, felt kind of pressured into marrying my mom, who turned 18 2 weeks after I was born. And um, and so I distinctly remember from the earliest memories knowing that I was intruding, like I was unwanted, that I was there was a problem because I was existing. And it was basically because my mom got pregnant at 17 that both sides of the family chose or began to pressure my dad to marry my mom. And so he didn't want to at first, but finally decided he could afford it. And I feel like he kind of lost what felt like were his means of finding significance in life. And he had been a drummer in the nightclubs and a film producer. And he was less free being married, which I understand that, being married and having a kid. But for him, I think the biggest loss was that he wasn't able to be free to live the life he dreamed of. And so um, later on, when he heard this teaching that within the Christian circles, that the man is the head of the home and God works through authority. And so God works through the husband and the father. And like no one else has as much access to God as he does, then he latched hold of that because it was a chance of getting his significance back and um, having a sense of power, because he didn't have that from himself, and was unable to find healthy ways of understanding his importance and significance and identity. So yeah, and as I go along, I'm definitely feeling like um, the various accusations that come to my mind of I'm trying to make people mad at my dad, which I'm not trying to do. I'm trying to get back at him, which I'm not trying to do. I'm simply telling my story and sharing what I experienced. And obviously, I have limited perspective on his journey. So I cannot know what the motivations of his heart were or are, but I have some pretty good guesses from living with him and observing him for those more than 22 years of my life. So something I didn't learn until recently was that I am very empathic. And that kind of changes how I see everything that happened and the significance of what happened. So everyone has the capacity to empathize with others, and everyone has the capacity to focus on themselves. And whether that's a healthy way of doing that or a not unhealthy way of doing that kind of varies by person and by situation and by incident. But we all can slide on that emotional scale of being very empathic and absorbing everyone else's experience and relating to them over much, or being too absorbed in yourself, more of the narcissistic end of the spectrum. And very few are on the extreme ends of each one, but most of us know which end we lean toward. And so I didn't realize until the last few years that I'm very much on the empathic end of things. And part of that I know is enhanced through abusive situations. A lot of people that experience scary, abusive situations where they have to tiptoe around others and really modify their behavior in order to try to keep someone calm or keep them from getting angry or lashing out or causing harm. They will heighten those empathic abilities. So I didn't realize that most of my life, I was living everyone else's experience and not living mine. Like it didn't matter what my experience was of life because I was so engaged in everyone else's, but it was because I was in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, what you desire or what you're experiencing doesn't really matter. It's like, how am I going to get out of this safely? And so when you're a little child, depending on the stage of human development, brain development, um, that makes a big difference in how those patterns are established and how you view the world. And so, even though after I was 7, or as I was in my teens or my early 20s, my world had been framed by this whole sense of survival, because my circumstances didn't change and actually kept getting more intense as my dad was doing better with his businesses, and he was able to spend more time at home. Then he was around more often, and he was micromanaging more consistently. And it just kept getting more and more and more intense. So from as early as I can remember, and I feel like, some people may not believe this, and I don't know what to say. There's no way to prove it, but I feel like from before I was born, I knew that I was unwanted. Um, and my first memory must have been, based on everything that I remember, and um, like I think I was 2. I learned to walk really early, and my parents were just like, in my memory, my parents were absolute giants. And my mom is only um, 5'3.5", and my dad is about was probably about 5'9", and but they seem like giants. Must have been, around knee height. So I must have been like 2. Um, but my very first memory is walking into the kitchen. My mom and dad are fighting, yelling. Mostly I remember my dad yelling at my mom. My mom was crying, and I wanted them to stop. I loved them both, and I wanted them to stop, and I wanted them to love each other. And I couldn't even get their attention. And so I'm like watching this scene in front of me, and I'm looking at my dad, and I realize that that is going to be me. Because, and again, I don't know how I know like this and how I understood as a small child, but he was male and I was male, and I saw what he was doing to my mom, and I realized that I was going to become that, and I was going to be that. And that was kind of where the self-hatred began, and the rejecting of my masculinity. And it was never a situation of wanting to be a woman or not wanting to be a man in that sense. It was just not being sure I should exist. Because as I grew up, I loved my mom. I really, really, really wanted a sister. I loved the women around me. I was extremely attracted to girls. I wanted to make sure they were safe and taken care of, um, and knew that they were amazing and beautiful. And yet at the same time, like if I wanted to take care of them and protect them, how could I do that if I was male? If I was the monster, if I was what shouldn't exist? And so that was the beginning of suicidal ideation through most of my life into my 20s, and really into my early 30s as well. But yeah, so there was a whole bunch of conflicting things, because that was very strong. And at the same time, I felt like I was too affectionate. Like there's a video of me probably around 3. Um, and I was sitting on my mom's lap or kneeling on her lap and just kissing her cheeks over and over and over and over again and giving her hugs and all this stuff. And it, like, I remember growing up feeling just like affection just felt natural to me. And I started, giving massages when I was 3. My dad asked me to start massaging his feet when I was 3. And I grew up giving neck and shoulder back massages to family and friends. And, but at the same time, the way my dad talked, and then later on, the way he talked to me specifically, it was clear that giving hugs between men and women in our paradigm um, and showing affection wasn't right, was wrong, and it led to evil and dangerous things. And even though like I didn't know yet what was considered evil and dangerous, um, I just felt this overwhelming shame that there was something wrong with me, the way I was made, and like who I naturally was wrong. So at the same time as all of that, um, so feeling too affectionate, there was something wrong with me. I was also wrong for being male, for existing as a male, because men were dangerous and damaging and evil. Um, I had a dream of marriage. So, like around 5, I felt like what I was calling God at the time. Um, and the only reason I say that is because I know that there's like a lot of associations with the word God. And, and so like, I kind of want to be distinct from whatever instantly comes up for you as the listener when you hear the word God. So I was just like, love, life source, whatever you want to think of. But I heard from God that he was preparing a princess for me. And that was overwhelming. I was about 5 years old when this happened and never questioned it, just like, oh, that's awesome. That's cool. And so, but it's important to know that when I heard the word princess, it was not a, like, what we've come to see Disney princesses as, or a Barbie or an entitled person or whatever other associations. It was someone who had experienced bitter things in life and allowed those bitter things to make her sweeter. So similar to gold being put in the furnace so that the dross can come up and be scraped off and be refined, become purified. Um, I knew that this woman was going to have been through incredibly difficult, challenging things, but that she had allowed those things to make her sweeter and more compassionate and more loving. And I wanted to do the same thing. And I also resolved at 5 that I was going to strive to become worthy of her by the time I met her. And part of that is definitely very sweet, very sincere. I honored uh, who I wanted to marry, who I wanted to be in relationship with. But at the same time, there were some issues with what I was picturing in that and how that played out, because I was already feeling unworthy of existing and already feeling like too affectionate to be allowed. And then I resolved to become worthy of my future wife by the time I meet her. So then it kind of created this idol of this amazing person that I was going to meet one day that I was trying to be worthy of. And so the biggest problem with that was that I kind of, in a way, I abandoned myself. I had already done that, but it was another way I abandoned myself and was trying to become something I thought I wasn't. And the thinking that I wasn't that was the problem. So true deep healing is coming back into yourself and realizing that you are the light and the dark. You are um, the the joy and the brightness, as well as the shadow, and loving all of yourself. And so my thinking was very much a separation thinking. So that. I rejected myself in my dreaming, in my goal setting, in my desires. And I didn't realize how that would play out. But so moving on from there, as I got into school age, my mom really wanted to homeschool us, and her desire was that we would have a better education than she felt like she had in the public school system, which, um, from her experience, was very valid. And she didn't get an education. She wanted to learn more, um, or she didn't get a quality education. And she felt like a lot of her classmates weren't there to learn and stuff. And so she ended up going to community college at 15 or 16, which is where she met my dad. um, and so what she had meant for something better for us ended up, as my dad kind of took over and took control of things, became more of a prison and more of an experience of the same thing for me, because I also wanted to learn and loved learning, but was very restricted in my learning because my dad got to the place of feeling like he had to approve of and know everything that I wanted to learn before I learned it. And he was very, very, very controlling. Like, um, he didn't want me excelling. And I feel like, um, in hindsight, and I even picked up on this as a kid, but he was very insecure, super, super insecure, and felt threatened by us doing things well and pursuing anything that brought us joy. And so a lot of the things that he restricted us in had spiritual language around it, religious language, I should say. But he um, was definitely insecure and very threatened by us, my siblings and I, younger siblings, growing up and becoming strong and powerful and gifted. And so, just to kind of give a snapshot, um, we were basically housebound. I was able to go to kindergarten for when I was 5 and 6. Um, and then after that, we pretty much were not able to go outside except with specific permission. Um, and especially as we got to when I was like 12, 13, 14, that was when my dad was able to stay home more often, and things got even stricter then. But yeah, eventually, like, we weren't allowed to exercise because we might overdo it and damage our bodies. Weren't allowed to eventually, like, I was, when I was 11, I was told I shouldn't draw. I used to cartoon and draw all the time, and I loved it. And I had, piles and piles and notebooks of all these drawings. And he said it wasn't real man's work, that I was playing and not working, and that I couldn't get paid to do that. So I needed to stop playing and become a man. Um, Same thing eventually with the piano. I love to play the piano. And he said it wasn't right for me to play while others worked. So, and he didn't want me to read because reading was an escape from reality and bad for my eyes. And like tennis shoes and rollerblades and bubble gum and sunglasses were all signs of rebellion, because rebellious kids wore those things and did those things. And no music with drums in it after 12, I think. And because drums were of the devil. I'd been playing, he had been a drummer in the nightclubs, and I had been practicing from basically before I could walk. I would pull all of the cushions off the couch and grab the drumsticks and like have the kitchen cushions around me like a drum set. And so I grew up playing, even though he said I didn't have enough discipline to ever give me lessons, which I think was just his insecurity in teaching, or acknowledging that I could be good at something. But so yeah, so all of those things, but also especially not allowed to interact with girls or children in general, our age, because of the verse that says foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, and the rod of correction will drive it far from him, which my dad loved that verse because he loved spankings. But he said if children are fools, then why would you let your children spend time with children? Just to, have a gang of fools. So we were not allowed to have friends. And, but his deeper priority was keeping us away from girls and anything potentially getting close to sexual. So on my 12th birthday, he took me to a parking lot. We had a kind of like, we called it a date. And every once in a while we would have those times with dad. And it was very special because he didn't really interact with us except for when, especially up to that time, when he was angry at us. And so he would try to be in his office, and we had to just try to be quiet. And then if we weren't, obviously, then we'd get in big trouble. So, so I was excited to be with him on my 12th birthday. And he talked about purity and saving myself for marriage, and asked me if I had any, impure thoughts about women yet. And he gave me a purity ring and asked me to sign a purity contract that I wouldn't have sex until I got married. And then he also established that we would begin daily confessions, and that it would be my responsibility to come to him to confess any sins, any wrong thoughts, any wrong actions, which is what we called masturbation. Even though like I didn't know yet at 12 what that was. I discovered it later. And then just like any attitudes toward my brothers and anything else. So he explained that God works through authority, and he also believed that God could not forgive me directly unless I had stayed under authority and confessed my sins to my dad first. My dad had forgiven me, and then God was free to forgive me. So for the next 9 years until I was 21, when I voluntarily chose not to confess sins to him anymore, based on the verse that says there is one mediator between God and man, that's Christ Jesus. Yeah, so every day I was supposed to confess to him. Obviously, that didn't happen every day, but most days. And if I skipped a day, I was super, super guilty and just like all kinds of shame and anger because I felt like God hadn't forgiven me for whatever I had accumulated that day, and I would have more to confess the next day. And part of it was, really enhanced by just how horrified my dad was at everything I said. And he was very certain that God couldn't forgive me at certain times for what I had done. And so, yeah, so many thoughts about all of that. But even before all that happened, I had at 11 discovered my mom's maternity books in our shelf. And of course, I was like intensely intrigued because I was getting to that age where I was curious what women looked like naked. And so it had all these crazy pictures and super intense, obviously birthing pictures and stuff. And but it took me a little bit to tell my parents that I had seen those, and just because it was super overwhelming at the same time, and I felt like maybe I shouldn't have seen any of those things. And so that was when my dad was just in shock and horror and anger, and he was like, "I don't know if you guys are going to heaven," because I showed my brother. um, and he's like, "I don't know if God can forgive you." Um, and so that was like the beginning of the confirmation of all my worst fears. That, yep, I am a man, I am male, I am evil and destructive, and just bent on just, yeah, horrible things. And so after just 2 years of confessing sins from 12 to 14, I remember this one time after talking with him, I just realized, wow, I can never get married. I can never get married because I am just too perverted and too evil and too messed up to um, ever inflict that on some poor girl. I was thinking at the time, poor woman. Um, and what was weird was that I had always pictured the girl I married. I always pictured being best friends with her growing up. And even though like I wasn't allowed to interact with girls, um, uh, I still pictured that. It's so weird because, and I still kind of like, that's kind of the default vision I've always had of how I would meet my life partner, was growing up as best friends and then realizing that we don't want to be apart and getting married. Um, so, yeah, so yeah, there's so much like I don't know what to do with, those dreams or those desires, but I was so intent, so even while all of this was happening every single night and throughout the days, I was praying for my future wife and asking God to protect her and bless her, and whatever I was going through, then I thought, well, maybe she's going through that too. And so whenever I felt like I needed something, I would pray for that for her, and all of that. But just like so much like mixed up. I had the purity ring. I knew I was supposed to be faithful to her. I had this idea that I was going to have to, like, we were really into courtship, like the really formal version of courtship, where if I was interested in a girl, then I would talk to my dad, and my dad would talk to her dad, and then her dad would talk to her, and then her dad would relay what she said to my dad, and then we would maybe set up some chaperone dates. That was like the ideal that all the families in the homeschooling circles that we were in um, had of what that was supposed to look like. And so, like, because I was confessing my sins every day to my dad, then I was kind of feeling like maybe like I was probably going to have to confess all the horrible things I'd ever done to my future father-in-law, and then to my future wife, and all sorts of craziness. And if I got forgiven by everybody, then maybe I'd get married. Um, but but part of like what was all tied in with that was like what I felt like was the wrongness of my natural desire to be affectionate, my natural inclination to be affectionate. And so since that was clearly wrong and evil, then there was a lot more pressure on my future partner, my future wife, because that was potentially the one person in the whole world that I could be freely affectionate with. And so, yeah, so just crazy, 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 crazy. Um, so lots of pressure. Um, so to kind of make things slightly more intense, when I was 15, my dad and my next brother and I went to the annual conference of the homeschool program that we were in. And I can't remember if it was a session that we were all in, because some of the sessions were for like fathers and mothers, and like separate sessions for fathers and separate sessions for mothers, and for sometimes they call them apprenticeship students, teenagers. Um, Sometimes all the guys, sometimes all the girls, sometimes all the apprenticeship students together. But so I can't remember whether it was a session my dad heard or something we all heard, but my dad um, sat my brother and I down with his notebook, because he'd been taking notes, and he had a few things that he felt like he had heard from God, that God wanted to make some changes in our family. And one of those things was that we were no longer allowed to talk to our mom about anything other than chores, because anything personal, anything deeper, a man should talk to a man about those things. And if a man can't talk to a man, then he's not a man. And that was particularly crushing for me, because I'd always felt closer to my mom. I'd always felt safer with my mom, obviously, but there was always a closer connection. And um, and so I was truly isolated. So obviously beyond the confessing that I had to do every day, or felt like I had to do, um, just kind of the minimum to stay safe and stay in my dad's favor, because I was trying to earn his approval for the first 22 years of my life. Um, I I didn't feel safe sharing my hopes and dreams, or my visions of life, or things, concerns or worries or cares. Um, None of those things felt safe with him. And I didn't really think of it in that language. That's part of my hindsight speaking. But so then it was basically true isolation. And so that was the case all the way until I was 21, almost 22, when my mom miscarried and almost bled to death because of complications. Um, and I realized in that moment that my mom had almost died, and I didn't know who she was because we didn't talk about anything other than chores. And so even though like we all lived in the same house, we weren't allowed to leave the house, we were all there together, like the level of control that he had over each one of us was super intense. And we all followed the rules to stay safe. So I realized after she almost died that I didn't care what he thought. I was going to get to know my mom, and I was going to talk to her. And I don't remember what the first conversations were, but I remember it kind of being pretty apprehensive to see if she was going to be okay with that, be okay with breaking the rules. But it started little by little and grew from there. But that eventually led me to being brave enough close to my 22nd birthday to drive into town without my dad knowing or giving permission or praying protection over me, um, and talking to the Marine recruiter. And my mom actually encouraged me to pursue that, or just at least reminded me that being in the Marines was something I had, was one of my childhood dreams, or fancies, I guess could be more accurate. But so yeah, so then after I did go to the Marines, that was a huge, that was super scary, overwhelming time. That was the first time I'd ever consciously done something that I knew was going to make him angry. Um, that was the biggest thing. I was like, the most terrifying moment was coming back and having to tell him that I had another appointment with the Marine recruiter. And I didn't know that just anyone could get a job or apply for an apartment or go to a community college or whatever. So I really, chose the Marines and the military because I thought it was my only option. And I chose the Marines because I thought I didn't have any discipline, because that was what my dad told me all my life. I was lazy and didn't have any discipline. Turns out I had hypothyroid and hypoadrenia. The doctors later said I never should have made it through boot camp because my levels were so low. But I had pushed myself so much trying to prove I wasn't lazy and hide my fatigue, that helped me get through Marine boot camp. So I got through the training, eventually got put on medical hold because of the issues, and eventually got processed out. But as I was beginning my own life and living my own life, um, clearly one of the things I really wanted was a relationship with a woman. And, but still I was feeling like I was finding the one. And so trying to make sure I was doing everything correctly and being careful. And, keep in mind, I'm in my early 20s, probably, let's see, must have been 23 when I first got on dating apps. And I'd still had never, like, I had not grown up with female playmates, and I'd not been around girls. And I had not even been allowed after, let's see, second grade. I'm trying to think. Was not allowed to go to the church youth group. Um, and I would see all the middle school kids going to their church building. It was a mega church that we went to. And I knew the youth pastor, and he kept trying to recruit us, but like my dad was just vehement that we would not do that. And there was something evil going on with all those kids together. And and I remember feeling like there must be something really horrible about me. And that was just like another way it confirmed that I could not be allowed in the presence of women. And so I'm carrying all of this internal conflict without really realizing it, without being conscious of it, as I exploring online dating for the first time. So eHarmony, Match, Christian Mingle, Christian Cafe. There was a whole bunch of different ones, and actually end up being staying friends with some of the connections I made from all over the country. But I, because of that experience, I ended up engaged twice in my 20s, a few years apart. Um, First girl was just very much in a similar situation. She had actually been in the same homeschool group across the country, homeschool program. And oldest in her family, we had a lot of things in common. We clicked really well. But she hadn't yet expanded out of her more limited circles and began to explore life the way I had. And so that ended up fizzling because she wanted to live more of life. And I am grateful for everything that happened now. At the time, it was devastating. I thought she was the one, even though I'd already had a couple of shorter relationship experiences that I also thought were the one. um, but that one was the most serious at the time, up to that time. And so I felt like I had guessed wrong and I'd messed up and like I'd invested so much and like what was wrong with me. Clearly now, she totally made the right call. I'm really happy for her. We're still friends. And I'm friends with a lot of her siblings. So really grateful for that whole experience and interaction, everything I learned. A couple of years later, met another girl, and also across the country through eHarmony. And she was in the Air Force. Um, and so I used some of the positive experiences from my first major relationship to make some assumptions about this one. And things seem to be going super well. They progressed even faster this time, got to the engagement stage even faster. And then my body started having panic attacks. And I was like, what is going on? Why am I freaking out about this? And I realized because it just been a couple months. We were already super serious. I'd already given up one by one most of the dreams I had for my life to become what she wanted. And I realized, wow, like the way that my first fiance was more like my mom and more like I was. And so like there was that connection, someone I could rescue kind of feeling where she was at the time in her life. Um, and she's very powerful now. It's amazing to see. But then the second fiance, I didn't realize that it felt like it was going so well because she was more like my dad. And it was very familiar, very comfortable. I was very used to disappearing and becoming whatever someone who had powerful energy wanted me to be. And and that was terrifying to realize because I knew I was going to have to get out of it because I didn't spend all of my life under my dad's control and all of that effort to get away just to step back into another lifelong commitment with someone else who's going to do the same thing. And so that was brutally terrifying, um, and just rough, because I definitely was not feeling powerful, but I knew I could not continue that relationship. And so all of the accusations that I was using her, and um, that I had messed up her life, and that I had made false promises, and all of this stuff. Um, and that's partly the reason that now, which it's been 13 years since that relationship, um, sovereignty, personal power, like releasing codependency, is super, super important to me, because every single person on the planet must take ownership of their life. No one has a right to a greater say in someone's life than they have themselves. And I feel like true sovereignty, true taking ownership, taking power in your life means that you get to change your mind. I don't believe that there should be any promise or commitment that you make that you have to continue despite damage to your being, to your well-being. Because if something means that you cannot be who you are, it's wrong. Um, so maybe I'll talk more about that sometime. But I truly, truly, truly believe that and want that. Like, if I were to get married, and at some point down the road, us being together was not best for her life mission or goals or whatever, it would be time for us to part. And it wouldn't be a tragedy or a failure, because we probably needed those years together. Um, but now I'm just philosophizing based on what I've experienced. But yeah, so both those engagements I clearly got into way too quick, because I had so little experience being around women, dating, being physically close to a woman, and being affectionate, and it was overwhelming. And I felt like, on behalf of all the horrible men, had to prove that I had good intentions and that I wanted the best for my partner. And I felt like there would be intense shame if I continued kissing her and being close to her and cuddling, and all those things even before I had sex. Um, if I didn't do something to prove that I wasn't afraid of commitment, or wasn't willing um, to take care of her, or make it right by her, whatever, like all these things that were part of the old way of thinking that I grew up in. And so, yeah, so after that second engagement, like, to realize that I'd gone a couple months in feeling like things were really clicking and really going well, all because I was stepping into my old habits of being codependent. And I didn't know that term at the time, but and becoming what someone else wanted me to be, and really just disappearing. Um, and yeah, recreating myself in the image that they projected that they wanted. So I felt like I couldn't trust myself, and I just couldn't even think about dating um, for a long time after that. And at the time, like, there was, or a couple of years later, I did meet this one gal that I ended up having a 10-year infatuation with. And I think it was because, yeah, I do believe there was a connection and attraction and all of that. And I still, like, care about this person, but she was clearly emotionally unavailable. Um, and, that was safer for me. And that was the other thing about the online dating was like going out on a blind date or, just asking a girl out in person would just have been way too probably traumatizing, but overwhelming, because I'd been like I'd been so sheltered from women and had dreamed so much about this ideal marriage that I'd pictured that there was a lot of safety in being online and reading about someone first and exchanging some messages first and having them answer some questions first and sharing a little bit of my story first and making sure that I was understood on a certain level before we ever met physically. And so like spreading out that process, like I had so many people. I mean, here I am in my mid 20s, late 20s, early 30s, mid 30s. And like I'm getting healthier. I grew up with health issues. And so I'm overcoming those and getting stronger and more fit. And so I was constantly having people volunteering to set me up with a friend of theirs or their daughter or their niece or um, whatever. And I said no every single time just because it was just way too overwhelming, like too much pressure, especially if someone like wanted to set me up, because not only did I have to navigate all of the overwhelm with that person, then I also had the expectations and hopes and pressure from the person that set me up. And like just picturing them saying, "So how did it go? What did you think?" was absolutely the most terrifying thing in the world, because I was still in that powerless, people pleasing, I have to make sure everyone else is okay mode. And and as the oldest in my family growing up, like that was how I kind of navigated the home. I tried to be a buffer between my dad and my mom and my siblings, and tried to micromanage my siblings so that they wouldn't trigger my dad and make him angry and get us all in trouble. And so I just felt this huge, overwhelming responsibility to make sure everyone else was okay. And that was part of my empathic skill set, was as I was experiencing everyone else's experiencing what emotions they were experiencing. It gave me essential data. I was able to know when someone was being triggered, when someone was getting close to getting upset or becoming sad, or all those things. I was able to do things to try to alleviate, but I made myself responsible for everyone else. And so, yeah, it was terrifying to have someone excitedly want to set me up with someone they knew, because man, yeah, all that pressure plus all the pressure I had on myself to be good enough, and then the pressure I had on the idea of marriage and finding the one, because there was also that pressure of, what if you go on a date and she's not the one? But what if it takes you too long to figure that out and you've already done some things with her? Then you kind of like you owe that to your future wife, whoever she is. And you have to kind of explain what happened or whatever, like craziness, just horrible mental accusations all the time. So, yeah, so I felt like I couldn't trust myself. I went through just a long period of just being resigned to sorrow and loneliness and All of this because it was just, I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I couldn't figure out how to break into the company of women, basically, without doing something wrong or being wrong. I did have a really good experience going through a 1-year Bible school that I felt like I was supposed to go through. And some of the classmates became lifelong best friends. If the saving grace was the friend zone, actually, uh, uh, the platonic relationships, the relationships where we both knew that we weren't necessarily interested in each other, or not interested enough for it to be an issue. Um, so some of my classmates, some of my coworkers, man, we became the best friends and still have really close friendships, even though we're all in different places in our lives. And yeah, when we get together, it's really beautiful. Um, and yeah, just so grateful for those relationships and friendships and best friendships. So that has been a beautiful thing. Um, so yeah, at one point in my life, in my mid 30s, I was feeling like, okay, maybe I can venture out again and go on some dates. And this time I was um, asking girls out that I already knew. And, and so that was a good sign of healing and growth. But at the same time, I often would have panic attacks on these dates, and probably not enough that they knew that I was having a panic attack, because I was also very skilled at, because I was taking care of everyone else. I, um, I recently learned from um, Dr. Irene Lyon. She's on YouTube, has some amazing videos on trauma response and things like that, healing and all that. But she talks about functional freeze. And I didn't realize that was something that I was experiencing, but I was experiencing functional freeze where, like, my mind and my body, my nervous system was in freeze, but I was also very trained to uh, carry on and to um, keep moving forward in ways that um, minimized anyone else's awareness of what I was experiencing. So, so I don't think anyone knew that I was. They probably, maybe, they probably had thoughts like, why isn't he, making a move, or why does he look or feel awkward or whatever. So that could be the case, but they probably didn't know I was having a panic attack. But and the reason was, like, logically I knew this was insane, but I was like, I felt this pressure that I was out on this date with this girl, and I didn't know if she was the one, even though at that time I, like, wasn't sure what I thought about that theory anymore. But but I wanted to take care of her, and I actually obviously cared about her as a person, and really, on one hand, wanted to be affectionate with her, regardless of whether we were together forever. But I also felt this pressure to know and decide and figure out whether I wanted to spend my life with her or not, before anything got close or physical or affectionate, because I felt like that would make me evil, if I was okay with being affectionate when I didn't know what my intentions were. Um, and so I would, like, really be melting down on the inside, because I'm like, I have to know, like, I really enjoy this time with her. I enjoy hanging out with her, but I don't know what I want for the rest of my life. And and man, yeah, just so much pressure. So I stopped dating again. And actually went through a period of time where I um, chose to re-envision my life as if I never got married, because obviously by my mid late 30s like all the dreams I ever had for my life were already broken. As far as like how I pictured it, I pictured um, uh, partner and family and all of that, wife and kids, and all those aspects of the dreams that I had for my life. Um, like none of it existed with starting in my 30s. So like, what was I supposed to be dreaming for? What was I supposed to picture? What was I supposed to envision? So, so then it was like, okay, so what if I never meet anyone that I want to spend my life with, and or that wants to spend her life with me? And and so I did. I pictured what a fulfilling life might look like if I was single, and I realized a couple of powerful things. And one was that I do have immense emotional um, what's the term? Intelligence. And I am able to connect with women on a very deep level so far, mostly outside of the romantic scene. Um, and I have deeper relationships with my friends, my female friends, than a lot of guys have in their marriage. And that's something I can be super grateful for. Um, and that will, you know, um, aging and being single should never change that. Like, um, if I am honoring and respecting myself and honoring and respecting all of my friends, I can continue to have incredibly deep, beautiful emotional relationships with women. Um, and then, as far as like not having kids, I currently have 9 nieces and nephews. um, and there are always kids around to love on. And so I can always like sign up for a volunteer program, or even like change my career and become a teacher, or whatever. There's always going to be kids around that need a loving, empathic male figure in their life, even just for a moment, um, if not a long-term thing. So, so yeah, so then that was really helpful in helping me to see value in my life without that particular dream of marriage and family. Um, so, so yeah, so then basically since then is when I've been learning more about personal sovereignty, and realizing that no matter what, um, no human should have the right to control or manipulate or leverage a promise or a vow against another human if it's not in their best interest. So, like, just the nature of things, every human, every woman, every man should have absolute sovereignty over their life and over their sexuality. That's something I realized was really messed up about purity culture in religion, is that within religion and even within government and politics, it's like every person's sexuality belongs to everyone but themselves, which is insane. So, like everything about you should belong primarily to you, and you get to give that to whoever you choose to. Um, so those are, yeah. So yeah, that whole concept of just taking your power back, for me personally, like realizing that I get to choose in each moment how I'm living and prioritizing my life, um, that I don't have to live my life within the confines of what I believe will be acceptable to some future wife that I have no idea if I will ever meet or whatever. Or even just the idea that she wants to control my life that way. Like someone that's really healthy is not going to be like that. So yeah, there's a couple of memes that I've collected that reflect some of what I've thought about. And one is like, this doesn't have any author, so I'm not sure who put this together. But love doesn't mean I want you, or I want you to be mine, or you're good looking or sexy. It doesn't mean I can't live without you, or I need you, or let's be together forever, or any of those things it is often mistaken for. What love actually means is I really like, respect, and appreciate who you are in all of your realness and sovereignty. And if there's anything I can offer without compromising my true nature that will help you on your path, then it will be a gift to me if you'll allow me to give it. In this way, I find I am loving more and more people every day. And I love that because it's not just a romantic or monogamous type of thing. This could apply to anyone. Like, I love who you are as a person. And if there's any way I can make your life better by offering something from me, then I want to offer that. And if you think about it, like on different levels, that's how the best relationships are in every category, whether it's friendships or parent-child or romantic. If there's that intention of like, I'm responsible for me, I'm already taking care of me. I see that you are amazing. I'd love to collaborate on a relationship of some capacity. And if that feels good to you, then let's do something. And that may just be lifelong friendship or whatever. Another quote is from Jetsumna Tesnin Palmo. Attachment is the near enemy of love. It is not a form of intense love. It's actually the enemy of genuine love. Genuine love does not cling. Genuine love says, I love you and I want you to be happy. Attachment says, I love you, therefore I want you to make me happy. So it's like the way I had grown up thinking of marriage and the way it seems like the religious culture and even the culture, American culture and a lot of Western cultures kind of view it as like, find a person that kind of meets a lot of the things and then make an agreement. Like, okay, we're going to be together, which is not wrong necessarily, but like we're really quick to define and structure things rather than just the simplicity of I love you and I want you to be happy. And if two people are mutually feeling that way towards each other, they're naturally going to be spending most of their time together. This quote from the book, The City of Heavenly Fire by Cassandra Clare. There's a whole series and it's fantasy and I love it. But there's this one quote from one of the characters. He did what he did because he doesn't understand the difference between loving and having, between giving yourself and taking. And he thought that if he could make me give myself, then he'd have me. I'd be his. And to him, that's love because he doesn't know anything else. But when I touch you, I do it because I want to. And that's all the difference. And then another friend of mine, Hallie Marie, we connected over Facebook and she wrote this. And I thought it was brilliant. Imagine someone having everything they need already and still wanting you, not because they have a spot to fill, but because they're enamored. and they don't need anything from you. They're just curious and enjoy spending the time. And they could live without you. They could love without you. There is just a mutual passion, a mutual admiration. You don't owe them anything, and they don't owe you. It's completely free. You don't belong to them, and they don't belong to you. And if one day you part, you won't curse the memory. You'll think of each other fondly, thankful that your paths ever crossed. Another quote by J. Warren Welch. If I don't need, what if I don't need you to belong to me? What if you just continue to belong to you and spend a lot of your time with me? Yeah, so those were some of the quotes that felt like articulated love that doesn't have attachment or codependency. And it certainly could end up in marriage um, once both people just know, hey, I love spending my time with you, and I really feel like I'm going to spend my life with you, or whatever, or a long period of time. Because I don't believe that divorce is failure either. Um, Sometimes the relationship is just meant to be there for a season, and then after that, it's no longer um, ideal, and that's fine. But yeah, so I had someone question me recently, asking what what does it mean for me to immediately disappear in a relationship? Because I was talking about how it's been in the past, and what do I mean about being codependent when I'm a free white male? And in her mind, she couldn't imagine how any man could have any problems with freedom when the men that she's known have been the ones to be abusive or to leave suddenly and abandon and all of that. And I totally get that. Um, but hopefully, this gives a little bit of an idea of um, what a good guy um, might have experienced. Someone who desires the well-being of women and the well-being of his partners. Um, yeah, because I feel like a lot of times when we're talking about men and what men have done to women, um, and what males, whenever the the word male is being used, or a lot of times masculinity, all of that is lumped into toxic masculinity because that is such a intense story that has played out for many, many generations, many centuries, and it's totally valid. But if that is what all men become in your mind, then that's the only reality you're open to and the only reality you see. And you don't see that the toxic men have also damaged the men who desire to be healthy. And sometimes the empathic men have taken on so much responsibility for the toxic men that they can't allow themselves to be available to the good women, the women who are waiting for them. So yeah, and obviously, we use a lot of simplistic terminology and phrasing in this subject, um, and try to simplify why there are single women who are amazing who are waiting for a partner, and all the douchebags that um, obviously don't see her worth or whatever. Every situation has way more going on than just that. So it's one thing to generalize for a culture, but to generalize and then apply that generalization to a specific situation is never going to be accurate. So, so keep the generalizations for the general population, but then, yeah, look a little deeper at individual situations. So, yeah, so every person has their own unique story, their own unique journey. And in some people's journey and story, I'm the villain, because of choices I've made. And in aspects of my story, I've been the victim. And I've also been the hero. And when we realize that we all play all roles, then there's an opportunity to kind of step out of the narrative and choose healing and choose something different and choose the self-compassion and realize that I am both light and dark, and the brightness and the shadow. And I can have compassion on myself. And that is kind of where I'm at right now is, for the longest time I've had, like, I no idea what I'm hoping for anymore, because life has turned out so differently than what I ever pictured and any of the dreams that I had. So, I, yeah, I genuinely don't know what to hope for sometimes, but, but I am focusing on my own healing, and I am focusing on the emotional resonance of the desires that I do know. Like, I do desire, um, partnership and companionship. But I need to be self-aware enough to not just immediately fill in with some of the details that have been a part of the picture in the past, like assuming that, like, I all grew up with that idea that my future wife was going to want to know all the horrible things that I did, just like my dad did, um, and kind of judge me and evaluate me based on all those things. Two broken, flawed humans that have compassion on themselves are going to have compassion on each other. And so if there's a genuine partnership, a friendship, a companionship, a love, a, kind of a teammate type of resonance to that, then I want to intentionally be picturing those things. Um, I need to intentionally picture the best type of feeling that I could have within a relationship and cultivate that feeling on my own. I've had some practice with that over the years. There was a time where I was working at a gym making minimum wage. I had previously been a manager at the YMCA, over the fitness department, coordinator of the fitness department, and making a lot more money. And so at the time I was like, I know I'm capable of more. I know that I am a good match for something bigger. And I just kept reminding myself of that. And I kept picturing that even while I was working minimum wage and cleaning all the machines and, all this stuff. And then I got an amazing job soon after that. And it was everything that I wanted for that season. And then more recently, like, I've been living in a trailer ever since I moved back from Michigan. I got to travel the country for a few months in my travel trailer. And then because the way, um, things changed, in my plans, then, I end up in the trailer for a lot longer than I had pictured. And, um, and so the last few months, last year, whatever, when I was getting frustrated with, the small space, and I felt like I couldn't have people over, and, I couldn't do a lot of things I wanted to do, because it was so tiny, I just would switch to feeling how it would feel to be in a house that I could, host people in, that could offer massage in, offer personal training in, just relax in, spread out, do some stretching, some workouts, um, And that made me happy to think about that. And I didn't have any like concrete things, nothing in the physical world to affirm that feeling, but it just felt good to picture that. And so I just kept focusing on that. And so it was a surreal just 3 months ago to take ownership of this home, and all the things I'd been picturing and feeling good about picturing, I was experiencing in real life. And I know that the same thing will happen with relationships. So I'm just going to continue trusting and knowing like what a healthy relationship feels like, and enjoying that. And one where I don't have to disappear, or that my worth doesn't depend on me becoming whatever the partner wants, um, but choosing to believe that a a good match is someone who really sees me for my strengths and my weaknesses, and loves all of it, loves my story, and loves loves spending her life with me and her time with me, and just supporting me and allowing me to support her and be there for her in the same way. And and thinking about that makes me feel good. It feels good to think about that. So I'm just going to keep enjoying that feeling and see what actually happens. But hopefully this was helpful. If you got this far, thanks for listening. I'd love to hear if you could relate, and what this brought up for you. Thanks for sticking by. Talk to you soon.